Susan, my classmate, and I are both members of the Gov 2.0 PIC here at the Kennedy School, which is a group of students that are interested in talking about, learning about, and developing opportunities to interact with issues of technology in the government, technology and policy making. So last year when we held our own workshop with the PIC about how to use Twitter in a policy setting, the Shorenstein Centre actually expressed an interest in running an entire series of these kinds of workshops. And so the digital media workshops that we're running this semester were born. So we're really pleased that it's taken off this semester, and we hope that with continued really good attendance on these evening workshops that it will continue into next year and maybe even creep into the formal syllabus. So we're glad that you can come, and we're glad that you're interested in supporting this kind of important stuff. So on that note, it was interesting. I was doing a little bit of, I'm not a blogger myself, I have dabbled in blogging a little bit in different circumstances, but I'm not a regular blogger, so I was doing a little bit of research before I came here tonight, and I noticed that the kind of Bible of authority for the Kennedy School, The Economist, declared in late 2008 that blogging had reached the mainstream. So obviously we're a little bit behind the curve to be learning about it now, but I think it's an important tool for people in government and policy, but also in all aspects of communication. Another thing that I noticed when I googled blogging was the first thing that came up wasn't Wikipedia, which is usually the first entry of any Google term. It was actually blogging tools. So instead of people wanting to learn what blogging is, people are actually wanting to do it, which is what Lisa's going to start to talk us through and walk us through tonight. So those of you with laptops, take them out. We're actually going to do some learning and some doing.
That's not rude. The more the merrier. I'll actually need volunteers.
Pop them on the table, and there's a couple more spaces on the table if you need that. So I guess without further ado, Lisa's going to talk through a bit of her background, but you'll have seen on the advertisement for today that she's the CEO and founder of Place Blogger, which I think she's going to talk a little bit about in a moment. And I think the main things, interesting things to know about Lisa is that she has fantastic practical experience in building online communities, working in online news type contexts, citizen journalism, and in staffing and managing tech projects. So I think we can hopefully learn a lot from her experiences this evening. She's also said if you've got questions that come up throughout, please jump in, and as I said, get your laptops out and let's get going.
Hi guys, how you doing? My name is Lisa Williams and I run Place Blogger. It's the largest searchable index of local weblogs. And I'm probably the only person in the history of history to actually get up in the morning and load the feed of everything from Canton, Ohio to there are 2 place blogs in Antarctica. But every time I do, it looks more and more like the incredibly not ready for prime time with AP, only with way more cat pictures. We index about 7,000 such sites. I tend to think of it as the happy shadow version of this. This is a map of closed newspapers and layoffs in the United States last year. So, we're kind of tracking where things are growing. Most of the time, I end up talking a lot about blogging to sort of mid-career journalists. Can somebody I don't know who you guys are. Can somebody summarize for me? What's going on in this room? Who are you guys? What program are you in? What do you expect to do when you graduate?
Well, there's a few MPPs in here, so we're sort of beginning, intermediate stages of our careers with a variety of interests. I'm interested in government 2.0 stuff, but I don't know who the other cool ones.
I'm a law student.
I'm about 7 or 8 mid-careers, but I don't think one journalist.
Mid-career journalist.
There you go.
Actually, I'm a columnist.
Oh, true. Sorry.
We're undergrads, interested.
Mid-career, I was in the public sector in the past.
There you go.
A lot of us are policy students, and I know with our class it was really popular to keep summer blogs about our travels and research.
How many of you have a blog, So a few of you. I'm just out of curiosity, how many of you look at Facebook at least once a day? How many look at Twitter at least once a day? So much fewer. I have this theory that people are either Facebook people or Twitter people. I'm really sort of a Twitter person. So, I'm more into that, but I think that's a really interesting phenomenon. So we have offices in Kendall Square, so Place Blogger World headquarters. Please come by and sample the free coffee. And I'm also a fellow at the MIT Media Lab. This is a great project that's spun out of the Media Lab that I had nothing to do with, but I like talking about it because I think it's such a great project. It's the One Laptop per Child project. It was aimed to get rugged, low-power using laptops into the hands of children in the developing world. And it had a really big impact. If you have a netbook, this is probably why. And there I work on sort of the future of I advise graduate students who are doing projects in either new journalism or sort of the future of civic engagement kind of stuff. I love my stalkers. Go ahead. Feel free to follow me on either of these services. When I talk to a lot of people, I end up talking to journalists a lot, and to me, blogging and having a startup are sort of really, really deeply intertwined. And the first question I get is, well, wait, I don't want to be part of a startup. And I tell them, well, look at the state of your industry. Not cool. So, I think that for me, the interesting part about, blogging and journalism is that I really do think that journalism will survive the death of its institutions. I have sort of a reason for this, which is I have a whole bunch of these. This is stock certificates for Digital Equipment Corporation, which used to be one of New England's major employers. What's happening to the news industry has happened before, and it happened to the technology industry in the late 80s, where we had a vast simultaneous crack-up of all of our major institutions. There was wave after wave after wave of layoffs. And there just seemed to be no end in sight. People wrote a lot of, kind of hand-wringing op-eds about how the government had to come in and bail us out, or we wouldn't be, sort of technological leaders anymore. And given that it was the late 80s, a lot of people thought that, Japan would be the next technological leader because they were in such a sort of big era at the time. But that's not really what happened. Less than 10 years after that, you have the IPO of Google. It looks kind of silly in retrospect. What really happened was that we had a restructuring of the industry. We had far fewer very large companies and a zillion really tiny ones. And the way people's careers worked really changed. We didn't have hierarchical careers anymore. I'm always really interested in the way people engaged in the public sphere or journalists kind of have this kind of hierarchical career path. They start out as a little weekly and try to work their way up to the New York Times. Nobody starts their life at a small software company and tries to work their way up to IBM. It just doesn't work that way, but that's not what we do. We follow around the same set of ideas and people through different containers, and we don't really care what the container looks like that much. So, and when I say that to people, they say, well, that doesn't sound like it has a dental plan. And I said, well, the thing is, when you're facing an iceberg, a kayak is really safer than the Titanic. It's self-propelled, cheap. And you can actually get a lot more done. A lot of the things that you use today, if you're looking at a website today, almost everything that made that website possible, the stack, which is often called the lamp, almost everything that made that possible was built in a dorm room by like 2 people. The individual parts of it. So you can have huge impact as a small organization now in a way that you couldn't before. So I think what a lot of people hear is this, but I kind of think this a lot more fun, right? So that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. But I first want to address, the sort of why bother. I think there's an aspect at which, I talk to people about blogging and they say, well, why would I do this, right? In terms of news and even in terms of sort of public attention, I think it's not enough to think about blogging or online news services or online communities as merely being a replacement for what we lost, if you think back to the map that I showed you earlier. I think that's not enough. That's actually a failure of ambition. If you're just trying to catch up with what you lost, you're not thinking big enough, right? I actually think that we should start to think much bigger. If you think about news, right, news is stuck way down in this hole here, right, with very few sources and sort of ADD on the time scale, right? But increasingly, our problems are distributed and global. They happen over a long time scale. You have a lot of sources happening over a long time. if you think about citizen journalism, that essentially ups the number of sources. That's a photo from you guys remember the time the plane crashed on the Hudson River? All of the iconic photographs of that were taken with iPhones. There were literally thousands of sources. This picture here on the front page of the New York Times. But when you think about things that newsrooms typically don't do well are things where you have lots and lots of potential sources happening over a very long period of time. Right? If you thought of the newsroom itself as a piece of technology, what you'd have to say about it is that it has very low messaging capacity. There are only so many people you can interview. Right? So like with global warming, what are you going to do? Interview every penguin? Right? So instead of taking a sort of vast data-oriented approach, newsrooms try to get around this. They try to, and the typical way they get around this is telling stories via anecdote. Like with the foreclosure crisis, you might go out to a particular homeowner's home is being foreclosed, you take some really heart-rending photographs, you do an interview with them, you do some background interviews with policymakers and people at banks, etc., and then that's that, right? This photo is from a story done by the Washington Post on the treatment of veterans at Walter Reed Army Hospital. They won a very well-deserved Pulitzer for it. They had, 5 or 6 reporters on it for close to 6 months. So it's one of the biggest, most powerful newsrooms in the world, and that's kind of what they can add to it. But still, they can't really get to a large number of veterans. And the problem with telling stories by anecdote is that they always end up with scenes like this one, where some weasel gets behind a podium and says, "This is just an isolated incident." And what are you going to do about it? You can't do anything about it. In many ways, journalism, I think, is like antibiotics. The powerful become resistant to it. I'm not sure that the Watergate coverage would have worked today. I think Nixon would still be in office. So we have to get better. We have to get up into the upper right quadrant of that diagram if we hope to have a healthy society.
Why do you say that? That doesn't quite ring true to me. I think, if anything, something like Watergate would have had an even greater impact today, because our patience when it comes to these sort of events and our trust in the politicians and the institutions are much more shallow.
I think the Bush administration made me pretty cynical about that. I think that you could just throw facts at them all day long and they just say, "Tough. We're going to do what we're going to do." My sense is that journalism actually has less impact on them. I don't really agree with them. I think there's more noise and less movement.
Well, I think that's an American phenomenon. If you go to UK and you get BBC and Sky News, their journalism is very intense. When people get questioned, it's very intense, and the journalists, they know what they're talking about, and they question politicians, when they're wrong. In America, I find it's very dumbing down of information, news, and everything, and people don't get challenged enough. But I think that's a culture of a wider culture and society we live in, rather than anything to do with the news media and the 24-hour news cycle and everything.
And I think it was a product of 9/11 and what it allowed the politicians to do after that.
Yeah, that's true. They could sort of push back and just say, national security, get out of my hair.
Yeah.
So I think that if you want to keep that pressure on, to me the answer is to sort of turn a story into a signal, right? And to give you an example of this, there are going to be upwards of 6,000 U.S. service personnel returning from Iraq and Afghanistan who, as a result of battlefield injuries, will be amputees. So I have a really simple question that's really hard for a conventional newsroom to answer, which is, how many of them have been issued a prosthesis? Right? It's actually really hard to answer that question because it's a question from a lot of sources that happens over a long period of time. And if you say, well, geez, it's impossible to do that. Well, it's not impossible. We do it all the time. If it's possible for me to know the stock price of Apple every single minute of every day, why is it not possible for me to know that? And to know that about housing crises, and to know that about climate change. It is possible if we actually try. So, in terms of starting a new site, I want to give you some practical stuff, though. I don't want to keep it at sort of like a theoretical level. How many of you have thought about sort of starting your own site from scratch? So a few of you. Do you have sort of frustrations about that? Are there places where you get stuck? Maybe not the best question. But, let's see here. Can I have a volunteer? Anybody who uses a PC instead of a Mac, just to make it easier.
Cool, man.
Well, then just anybody.
I have PC, but I have no battery.
Oh, that's okay. I'm gonna have you come up here and use this.
No, you just go there. You
Go
just
there.
go there.
You won't need it. You're just gonna use this.
I'm not able to use it.
Oh, that's okay. That's kind of the.
And
That's
the
kind
learn
of
with
the point.
You're a great user for George. Go for it.
So I think I'm going to take you through the process of putting together an extremely basic site. One of the great things about this is how easy it's become. A lot of hosting providers now provide what are called one-click applications. So if you have a URL and you want to start a site, just Google one-click applications and look for a hosting provider that you like. I really like this company called Media Temple, right? And once you get in there, it'll ask you what your domain name is. This is a domain that that I own and have hanging around. Could you click on that? Tomlinson.org. Just click on it. Where it's going. So scroll down a little bit. And see down here where it says one-click applications. Now I primed this a little bit, but for this particular host, you can install WordPress, which is a common blogging application. You can install Drupal. Drupal is an interesting application because instead of being intended to be hosted for one blog, it's a system where you can start a community site where 100 people could have a blog, right? And people can sign up for their own accounts. I think for most people, if you can, I think you should stick with WordPress just because it's better and easier to use and there are more developers on it. A lot of these one-click application kind of stuff will also have ad servers, e-commerce stuff, if you're selling t-shirts or something like that. See that arrow where it says finish? Just click that. Let's give it a title. Since this is just a demo, we won't have an index by search. Automatically generates a password. This is user number 1. Okay, so now you have your database all set up and the application is sitting on top of it, and now you have exactly one user account. Bingo. That's how easy it is. You just set up a website. Woo! How long did that take? Maybe 3 minutes? 4 minutes? I don't know.
So you just
Which one was the site that we started?
So if you go to demo.tomlinson.org, and somebody do that, because you'll actually be seeing the front end of the site. Like, you see where it says Shorenstein demo blog here? Could you click visit site?
That's cool.
Oh, wait. Before we do that, see how it says that red box there? That's actually kind of important. Go down.
Yeah.
Right here. Right here. No, it's okay. It's hard for me to point out there. Yeah, take me to my profile page. The one thing you want to do is remember it gave us that long, hard to remember password. I don't remember what it is. So we better change it right away. So just click on that. So the first thing to do. If you don't, you can't get back in. You'd have to start all over and sort of destroy the site and start again. Oh, 3 minutes more work. So let's choose a new password there. Where it says new password right here. Let's just call it demo. Yeah, same thing. Same thing.
How it looks.
And then, so now hit visit site up here. Ta-da!
oh,
right? Now, the thing that if those of you who have laptops could actually log in, the username is admin and the password is demo, D-E-M-O. Right, so you can get into the background. You can make yourself. You're an admin user, so you can delete everything. So don't. But you can also make yourself your own user account in there if you wanted to. Now, the first thing I would say about this is, wow, that's ugly, right? So let's get it some new clothes. So why don't you hit the back button right here?
That's a good quick question. How did you, so I just went to the media template site, so do you have to, what do I, you have to buy the...
That's true. You need that's actually a really good question. Because remember I said, start a community, start a blog or a community site in an hour and $20. The $20 is what it costs me to get a basic account at media template, right? So when you, here, I'm going to take this for just... Does anybody use Chrome? This is Chrome.
Yeah.
Anybody say yes?
Yeah, I use it. My brother installed it on my phone, so
I think it's really great. So if you log into your Media Temple account, you'd have all the domain names that you have on your server, right? Okay, so if you signed up for the service, this is what you'd see when you logged in, right? And in the background, I can't tell you. I hate to be all, we used to walk uphill 5 miles in the snow each way to school, but this is so much easier than even 5 years ago. A lot of what I used to do was like, telnet in and type scary Unix commands in a command prompt. This is so much nicer. You can see all the things you can do here. You can set up email, you can put files up on your server, you can make new users for your email system, you can have all sorts of logs, you can have databases, all this good stuff, right? But the main thing that, for anybody who wants to start a site is this, right? Yeah, it's the one-click application install. And you can add really as many as you have room for, right? So these guys have 3. Those were the 3 I need. So a lot of people have more if you're interested in if you find another application that you're really interested in. But to go back to our site, okay, why don't you click on Appearance? The first thing I like to do is give my site a wardrobe. Give it some clothes. It's like Adam in the garden. That's how many clothes. So click on Add New Themes. Okay. Up here, do a search for the word magazine. Is a collection of files that define the look and feel of your site. They use a technology called cascading style sheets, or CSS. And the advantage that they give you is that they make sure all of your pages are uniform. They're cascading. They cascade down through your site. And there are literally thousands and thousands and thousands of free themes. You can also do your own from scratch if you wanted to learn CSS. But I haven't found it really necessary to do that. I have enough CSS to sort of change and tweak little things, but I don't need much more than that. So let me scroll down a little bit. Oh, wait, I really like this one. This one over here is a good one. So hit install. Just hit install now. Try it one more time. I think it's just a little slow. Just wait a minute. It's working on it. Yeah, there we go. Now let's go back to themes. This is like sort of the closet for your. You can have lots of themes in here and not be wearing them all, right? So now we have a new available theme. Okay. So scroll down a little bit and hit activate. Now visit site again. Go back here. All different. Much nicer. So let's hit the back button. Oh, you're logged in.
Mm-hmm.
That's great.
Yeah.
The one thing that we don't have for this class that would be really useful if we did have is some sort of basic content. But think we can get along without that for now. And let's see. Now you see, you also have a new menu thing. It says Magazine Basic. It's about your theme. Some things are more sophisticated than others. So hit layout. So if you're doing a news-like site, right, you can change the width of your site, make it wider. And then let's have more sidebars. And let's make the first sidebar bigger. Right? Maybe we want to put photos in it. Scroll down a little bit. It gives you all sorts of things that you can do later. What do we see here? Maybe it's saving for us. So, and this one is a fun aspect of this theme. See how it says image resizer way down the bottom? Just click on that. That's nice because every time we put up an image, you ever put up an image on a site and it's way too big, it screws everything up? This auto resizes them for you. That's a really nice feature. And you know what? I think it just likes us. Now we need to tell it how many to have. So let's have that. And scroll all the way up the top. And, oh, save changes, that's what I was looking for. When it does that, let's see that it's different again. You don't have a particularly fast connection.
Do you have any step-by-step?
Well, it's a good idea.
You know, I should. Don't you think?
It's a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be too hard to write a how-to for this.
It's a very good
Right?
idea.
But if we had content now, we don't have a lot of content, so it's hard to see the fact that you added a whole bunch of, you can see something, right? So, just to show you, I did another site. This is another site that we were playing around with for a client that got some grant money to do blogging with journalism students. And the content is just scratch content. We were just doing demos with them to show them how to use it. But you can see here, when you scroll down, how nicely the columns put things together for you. Nice, clean-looking, professional look. Yes.
If I want to do some video things on a web page, how can I?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that one more time for me?
If I want to do some video piece on my web page, how can I do it?
Oh, sure. Let's see here. Let's just go to YouTube. I actually use YouTube as my backend. It used to be that when I had a video file, the video file was huge, right? It took a long time for everybody to download. And I had to think about having it in all these different formats depending on what device people were going to watch it, right? The nice thing about YouTube is you upload it and they worry about that. They have the YouTube player, and the YouTube player is embeddable on other sites. It's hard to figure out what to pick here.
Go with the first one.
Yeah, that's a good one.
All right. So, I don't have sound. So you're just going to have to...
9/11 Commission.
Wait, all right. I can't... It's kind of, see this embed code right here? Right? If you have your own account on YouTube, what it lets you do is it has a place where you can upload something. Do you have like an account like with a photo sharing service or anything like that, like Flickr or?
Yeah.
It's the exact same thing. It's just that the upload takes a little longer. When you're done, it gives you a page like this that has that code that says embed, right? That's a little piece of a scripting language called JavaScript, right? And what it does is when the page loads, it tells your browser, open up this window, okay? So the nice thing is you don't have to worry about any of that stuff anymore, and you can be pretty sure it'll play on virtually everybody's machine. So what we do is we click on that, copy it, let's go back to our site, right? And let's go back to, let's actually post something. And let's make a new post. Let's see if this actually works. Wow, it's long, huh? Okay. Yeah, we might have to do the HTML here. Ah! Oh. Didn't work. Wonder why, right? So, let's see here. One of the things I think is kind of challenging about doing this kind of work is that there are some things you set up once in the beginning, and you do them, but you don't do them often enough to really master them or to remember how you did them the next time. So I know that I've set up a lot of sites to show video. Now I can't remember how. Let's see if this one works.
That's the steps.
Ta-da! So you have to click, so that's important. You have to, when you use this, you don't have to know HTML. Right? You can use bold and italic, and you don't have to know the HTML tags for those. On the other hand, if you give it a lot of script content, I guess it screws it up, right? It tries to publish it kind of raw, right? So now, oh, it's okay. We already saved our changes. Interesting. I think this is because this is an interesting. Why isn't it showing on the first page? This is actually an interesting answer. You remember in the site that, let's see if we can bring that back up. Oh, it's not the right one. It's this one. In the site, notice how it doesn't show the whole. It doesn't show the whole thing. One of the things your style sheet can do is automatically shorten those things. Like we didn't tell it to only show that, right? It just knows to do that because it's part of the style sheet. So I think the style sheet for this particular, that we put in here, wants to put those things, in other words, behind the fold. But if you look at the actual thing, it's there, right? So that might be a reason to choose a different theme, right? To go back to appearance. You might say, that's not the theme for me, I'm going to search for a new theme and try that out. And you saw how easy it was to sort of put a new theme on something. So if you wanted a video-centric site, you know, if you post a lot of video, maybe this isn't the theme for you. In fact, I bet there are video-oriented themes. So here's a themes are oriented towards videographers. You choose one of those, and those might be sort of optimized or customized for you. Right, the magazine theme is really for a sort of magazine layout site.
And one more question.
Yeah, please.
If I want to put some podcast in on my webpage.
This is a very good question because it'll actually lead us into the next thing. The great thing about a lot of these is that there's tons and tons of little tiny firmware add-on programs called plugins that you can add on. You know, so let's take a look at adding a new one and see if we can add a podcast plugin. Interesting. One of the now my big problem is this is like which one do I choose? You know, there's almost always like 18 of everything that I want, right? You know, so you know, and I find the rating a little bit opaque. You know, but let's just choose the first one. Just hit install. This is very much like doing the choosing a theme, right? Yeah. Now, yeah, see where it says activate plugin there? Click on that. Now our list of plugins has one new plugin. Okay. And it's all set, it's activated. The ones that are shaded gray are not active. Almost every install of WordPress will come with a plugin called Akismet. It connects you to an anti-spam service. So one of the first things you do is to turn it on. It'll help stop comment spam for you, right? So now this particular plugin has settings, right? So it talks about, here's your, tell us about your podcast. Here's your podcast stuff, right? It lets you put in all of this kind of stuff, and it puts in a player for you, right? So it puts in an inline player, so people can download the podcast and put it on a portable player, or they can play it on your webpage, right? Even lets you say how big the player is, player width. That's in pixels, right? 290 is not that big. Has a video player with it too. That's kind of cool. So if you have a video, and it gives you tons and tons and tons of options, most of which you never have to touch. I would say probably the thing that you need to touch the most is tell it where your podcast is, right? Unless you are posting the files yourself. Okay, if you uploaded the files to iTunes, you'd probably give it your iTunes URL, right? So that it would be able to bring stuff in from there. WordPress already has some things built in under this media link. You actually have a media library, right? I really use third-party services like Flickr and YouTube and iTunes a lot rather than doing it myself, because I figure they're going to do it better than I do it, right? It's not worth it to me to host files, essentially, to host video, audio, photos. I get more out of using Flickr than I would out of pushing up my own files. On the other hand, this gives you a nice, simple way to, let's say you do a package on one particular thing and you really want to keep images in one particular place. Let's say you're putting up a presentation, you have a lot of slides, right? A lot of charts and graphs. You can put them up here and just sort of by hitting the Add New button, it'll let you upload a file, right? It's really, really simple. And once those files are there, you can put them in your post. Go ahead.
Sorry, I have to
No,
ask one
please.
more question.
More. You're asking really good questions.
Suppose that I want to set up a website for my class after graduation, and I want to have a video piece and a podcast piece and maybe slideshows. And how can I do this?
You can do all of these things. Basically, what you have to do is choose an appropriate theme, right, that makes the elements look the way you want them to look, right? And then for each of those things, you might choose a different plugin, right? Or you choose a third-party service. Like I think for slideshows, Flickr has a wonderful slideshow player that's a lot like the YouTube player that I just showed you. So you'd make a group of photos, right? And it gives you that little embed code, and then it would just show up on the page, right?
You mentioned hosting a couple of times. Could you just elaborate a bit on that?
Sure. I think that, in terms of hosting, you should find somebody you like and kind of stick with it. The ones that I recommend the most are Media Temple, SliceHost, and DreamHost. They all have, very, affordable packages.
What's the other one? Media Temple, DreamHost,
and SliceHost. SliceHost is the most technical, and it's the least kind of one-click oriented. DreamHost is the most like Media Temple. It has fewer features in that back end, but you can start at $8 a month, $20 a month.
And how do you feel about GoDaddy? Because that's Okay, good to know.
I think, I actually register a lot of my domains, so when I want to buy a new URL, okay, I buy the URL from them. But I don't host websites there, just because they make it really hard, right? They make it too hard. And they really lock down a lot of things that you would want to use as a site developer. I think if you want to have a few static pages, GoDaddy is great. if you want to use an application and install a whole new site like on WordPress or Drupal, it just makes it too hard for you, right? And the options that they have I find really bewildering, right? But that brings up one other thing that I think we should cover, which is, let's say you have a domain name. How do you get a website to show up at that domain name? Like, it's really easy to go to WordPress.com and get, your own thing, but it's like yourblogName.wordpress.com. Like, let's say you want to have your own URL. Okay, you don't want to have blogspot.com or whatever like that. So let's actually go to GoDaddy for a minute. Yeah, cheesy. I think, one of the things that's happened to me over time is, like, I keep accumulating URLs for things that I don't do. I have, like, a ridiculous number of URLs for things that I never did. And I also have I buy my kids' names, right, to preserve them for the future. Like, Tomlinson.org is my maiden name, and I use it for family email. We don't actually have so I have 16 domains. Jeez. That's kind of sad. I need a new hobby. All right. So, but let's look at PlaceBlotter, which is one of my core sites. Right. Now that's kind of confusing. Okay. Essentially, what you want to do is point your domain at your server. So let's say you have a Media Temple account and you bought a URL from GoDaddy. What do you do next? Right? There's a basic technology called DNS, Domain Name Service, right? Everything that's connected to the internet, including all of our machines, has what's called an IP address, Internet Protocol. It's a series of numbers, usually, 3 numbers, dot 2 numbers, dot 4 numbers, right? And I think the IP, and a lot of times, if you know the IP address of the server that you're on, you can actually just type in HTTP and the number. It'll go to the site, which is useful when you're developing a site before you actually have put the URL on it. But what DNS does is it matches plain language URLs with IP addresses. It says this name goes with this IP address, which is associated with this machine here, right? So what you want to do is do a little domain management. Okay, so let's see, where's the domain manager? Oops, sorry. DNS. So you see down here, this allows us to associate our URL with our stuff, okay? So see these things that say NS, right? Those are name servers, right? And your host will give you a pair of these, right? So with Media Temple, it might be ns1.mediatemple.net and ns2.mediatemple.net. They might have a lot of them, right? And what you do is when you edit this record, I won't, because we don't need to, but we could edit this record and we would just put in whatever your host does, right? You save the record and you're done, you get out of there, right? DNS actually sort of percolates through the internet, right? Like, how does the rest of the internet know that you've now associated these two things, right? Well, servers on the internet now have sort of host tables, lookup tables, right? And it takes a while for those to update. So they often say 24 to 48 hours. I notice that time has gotten shorter and shorter and shorter. Like, I often get a URL mapped to a site within a few hours, right? So now when I type the URL, it works, right? It actually goes to the site that I want it to go to. Okay? So that's in general how I do it. A lot of hosts will let you buy the URL with your hosting account. Media Temple actually does this, and a lot of them discount it. Like, buying a .com domain at GoDaddy is about $10, but you can get it, and it's annual. Okay, you have to re-register your domain every year. And at Media Temple, it's only $5, right? And then you don't have to do any of this because your name servers and your host are the same thing, right? So you don't have to do that. This is if you already have bought a domain from somebody else, right? Anybody you've bought a domain from will let you change the DNS records. That's what you actually want to do. So if you're not at GoDaddy, you look around for where do I put the DNS records, and your host will give you something like that, ns7.placeblogger.com, right? They'll give you something with their URL on it for their name servers, and you just put those two in, you save it, and you're done. Please.
You know when you went to that list of plugins and you said, what do I do? How do I know which one to pick? And it had, I think they had star ratings or something. I was wondering, is there a discussion board associated with WordPress or a community that you use to just say, I want my plugin to do this, can you recommend one?
There's the WordPress Codex, okay, but the frustrating thing is that there really isn't.
Right.
You know, my main, you know, like let's say we wanted to have a ratings plugin. We wanted people to be able to rate our post. Okay, now there's literally, you know, probably hundreds of these, right? And they're all kind of confusing, you know. What I do is I install them, I try them. If I don't like them, I trash them, right? The one thing you need to know is that this is the most common thing you will do that will crash your site, is that the plugins are written by a host of volunteers. There's no quality control whatsoever, right? None, right? And a lot of times what you'll find, like, this might actually be tested, right? Warning, this plugin has not been tested with the current version of WordPress. Haha. Right? And you'll get that basically all the time, right? And so sometimes what will happen is you will install a plugin and you will get the white screen of death. Your site will be gone, and that will be very sad. So I want to give you an emergency recovery tip. First of all, the very first thing that you should install two things right away. You should activate, let's look at the installed list here. You should activate the anti-spam plugin, okay, because that's actually a security thing. Spammers can get in and kind of screw up your site just by, you know, hacking into the comment system. And get a backup plugin, right? There are lots of plugins to do backups. There are several good ones. Just pick one. They're pretty safe and easy, right? People who make backup plugins generally test a lot. You know, it's kind of part of their thing. But let's say that you try something and something goes terribly, terribly wrong, right? Well, you go back to your, go back to this and look at File Manager. You should have something that will let you look at the files on your server, right? So on the other end of this, there's an actual physical piece of hardware that's running Unix, and this is the file tree on it, right? So sometimes you have to kind of like, you know, just kind of spelunk around a little bit, you know, until you find where your stuff is. Oh, well, that looks kind of promising, right? Aha, right. So all of your, here's your WordPress installation. You know, you can tell because it has WP on it, right? So if you have a plugin and it screws up, navigate until you can find WP content. And there's your plugins folder. And there's all of the folders for our plugins, right? One of the things you can do is just delete them, right? Sometimes it doesn't have a little delete symbol, and that's because it wants you to delete the files that are inside before it deletes a folder. It's kind of a safety thing. It wants you to, wants to take away the possibility of you doing something catastrophic to your site, so it's kind of time-consuming, but you can get rid of all of this stuff. Get rid of it all, and then just launch your site again. Usually it's fine, right? So, but that's also like if you're having a day where you're like, you know, I don't know, you're snowed in or something, and you want to fool around with your website, and you put in 8 million plugins, back up first, right? And then play around with the 8 million plugins. Because if you crash the site, and then you have to trash this, there's a potential that you might actually destroy some data or corrupt the database, and if you're not backed up, that's going to be pretty sad.
Let me know about this is analytics. It's not exactly on website creation, but at the beginning of the session you said blogging and startups are intertwined.
Yes.
So I was just wondering if there's sort of concrete recommendations that you give your clients or things to think about related to that we could take away.
Indeed I do. So I think for you guys, the thing I would say is, you know, there are a few things that I always say to everybody about having a startup, right? Which is, first of all, you start out with this huge blank page. A lot of people, when they say, well, you know, what are you going to start a website about? The most common answer is, you know, I don't know. You know, you have this enormous blank page. So the nice thing is to sort of carve out a lot of the potential possibilities down to a few, okay? So I often think about, you know, I think of these as learning opportunities, right? In which case I want to be in control of it myself, right? So I think of an idea and I say, is this something I could do under my own steam for a while? Is this something I could do myself? And now you guys can like, oh, I could start a website. I don't need anybody's help to do that, right? You know, I've got $20. I don't need a venture capitalist, right? Stay away from those guys. I like my firstborn. So the once you've got that, and then you say, well, what's the content, or what community do I have to build? And is that something that, say, I would be willing to commit my spare time to over, like, say, 6 months or a year? And is there a reasonable chance that if I did that, that what I would have at the end is something of value, or that I would have learned a lot? Then you have sort of the right idea, right? This is the other thing. We now have like real offices, but for a very long time my office was an unheated, enclosed porch off of my house, right? And so in February I used to work on a hack, right? And I keep learning the same lessons again and again and again, right? And when I would have one of these, I have all of these things over my desk, either with Post-it notes or giant pieces of tape, and I write on them, so that I don't forget. And this is one that I have to relearn a lot. Don't do anything for free that you wouldn't do for free indefinitely. So if you get an idea that you can do under your own power, and that you think has value, right? But you don't love it enough that you wouldn't do it for free indefinitely, that's the wrong startup idea. Pick something else, right? It's actually really important that you like it a lot, because if you're going to make the leap, right, you have to remember that, you know, the problem with a startup is it is kind of like one long existential crisis. You know, when you have a job, you have this kind of like existential warm fuzzy blanket of, you know, if somebody gives you something stupid to do, you say, I think this is stupid, but my boss told me to do it. If you have a startup, you say, I think this is stupid, but oops, I told you to do it, right? And that's the thing about having a startup, is you're going to be bad at it, right? You have to like it enough to be willing to be bad at it. I'm really bad at having a startup. You know, I have survived so many calamities of my own making. You know, you know, I didn't do any of these things because I was good at them, and I'm still not good at them, right? And I think that's actually a very difficult thing to face about having a startup, is that, you know, if you're used to being good at things, if you were good in school, if you were a high achiever, it's really hard to get up in the morning and face a day where you're going to do a lot of things that you're not good at. So you really, really have to care about the thing involved, and you have to be able to sort of let go of that desire to sort of have mastery of everything right away. Right? This is a National Historic Site. You know, like the garage that everybody is founding startups in, right? This is the garage that Hewlett-Packard was started in 1939. Right? It's actually on the historic register. You can go visit, right? And and you know, like this was my original office. This is that back porch, right? You know, so a lot of times, you know, they're really kind of humble. The other thing that you have to face about having a startup is that most people, especially your family, won't respect you. You gotta wonder, like in 1939, what did Hewlett and Packard? They were both married and had kids. What did Hewlett and Packard's in-laws think about them? You know? Oh yeah, right? A startup is really glamorous when you start to make money, right? But the other thing to recognize is that I don't think that a startup is, or a company at all, is sort of the pinnacle of evolution, actually. I think that the most adaptive form to put your ideas is not a company. Companies are very fragile, right? You know, so, you know, projects are much better. Don't have a company, don't have a startup, have a project. Projects are awesome. And if projects want to become companies, they'll tell you, right? If you keep going and then people start wanting to give you money, and people want to start coming to work for you, then you have a startup, right? Until then, don't worry about it, right? Don't worry about it at all, you know? Never start a company when you can start a revolution. So much better. right? Revolutions don't need office furniture. It's awesome, right? So the other thing about starting a site is the web really rewards what I call narrow comprehensiveness, everything about something, right? I think that the reason that Amazon won out over Barnes & Noble in the sort of the online bookselling race in the US was that they actually did a crazy thing in the beginning that everybody thought was bananas, which is they committed to selling every book in print, right? And they actually made distribution deals with the original publishers to drop ship from the publisher, right? And everybody thought that's crazy, that's way too expensive, right? But that kind of comprehensiveness means something. So again, when you think about what can I do on my own, and what can I do that when I have the end of it, I'll have a complete set of something, right? First of all, search engines really reward that, and people start to treat you as a reference.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit? That word comprehensive, I'm not
So, a site with a few restaurants in Denver is interesting. A site with all the restaurants in Denver is useful, right?
Okay.
So when you think about the thing that you want to do, think about what you want to become the authority on. And what do you want to have comprehensive coverage on? Right? The other thing is that the web kind of turns how news organizations work on their head. You know, a lot of news organizations are about adding value to something. They go to something free, like attendance at a public meeting. Generally, you don't have to pay to get in, right? And they save time for you. They add editorial value. They summarize that experience and then giving it to you. They're adding editorial value, right? A lot of things on the internet take things that used to be very expensive and make them free, right? So, you know, when you have your idea, you say, well, what is it that I'm making cheaper or free, right, that wasn't there before? I think that's all my words about startups, because I wouldn't have put that slide there if it wasn't. Do you guys have more questions about sort of like how to start a site? That's my absolute positively most basic way to start a site for everyone. By the way, you were a great demo volunteer. Thank you so much.
I have a question.
Please.
How do you get people to come to your site? I mean, that's a very obvious question, but like in the beginning, how do you keep them coming once they've hit the first time?
Mm-hmm. I think there's a problem that's even before that, which is what do I write? What do I put on there? Right? And to me, what I write is almost always about what I read. Right? I subscribe to 1,400 RSS feeds. I follow 800 people on Twitter. So, you know, I'm responding to other people and linking to them. One of the easiest ways to get people to come back is to link to them, right? And then I think with, in terms of building an audience that will come back, right? And this gets into like planning your sort of editorial calendar, right? Which is that your site not only has to change every day, it should probably change a few times a day, right? So if you're working on your own, right, you have to think, how can I get this site to change 3 times a day? And that probably means you don't start entirely with original content. Original content is part of your strategy, but not all of it, right? And so part of what you might do is because you're, let's say that you want to name a subject. What do you think are you a master's student?
I'm a tutor at Kirkland over across the street. And my blog right now is actually trying to get Kirkland students to participate in the arts around campus and just know more about visual arts in general. So I actually have a blog, but they never visit it until I send it to them. And part of it is that Harvard students are all super busy.
Right.
But it's just the idea of how do you get people to kind of remember that it's there and click back. I'm also a
What about having a Facebook fan page for it that updates with the feed from the site? So one of the ways to get them is to not have them come at all, but to get them where they are, right? If you have a Facebook fan page, you can feed your RSS feed. RSS feed. Everybody know what an RSS feed is? No? Okay. This thing subscribe. That'll bring us to our RSS feed. Wow, yucky, right? But that's how it's supposed to look. An RSS feed is a machine-readable version of your website, right? It generally strips out all of the visual elements, right? And you give this address to your Facebook fan page, and it gives summaries with links of the latest things on your blog, right? So if you don't have a full text feed, right, presumably they'll click through from that. And also, if they become a fan, they'll be notified every time it comes so that you don't have to go through that process of always pinging them about it, right? And you can do that by pushing things through to Twitter and having people follow you on Twitter, and you can also do sort of email newsletters. There's like, you might have like an email newsletter plugin. And again, you know, one of the things you do on your side of the website is to look for plugins that do that for you.
So could you just, in that example then, have you now subscribed to that?
No, we're just looking at it.
Okay.
Right? Actually, I'm using an account on this machine that was nice and clean, so that I do a lot of crazy things with my machine, and I didn't want it to crash while I was doing it. So I don't actually have an RSS reader on this account. But for instance, like if you had, does anybody have a Google Reader account? Right? Google has a very nice RSS reader called Google Reader. And if you had a Google Reader account, what you would do is find this subscribe link or the RSS link, you'd give it to your Google Reader account. And then instead of having to check all these sites and see if they have anything new, you just check into your Google Reader account and you see what's new. Right? Did you have a question?
Yeah. Traditional media, they have an editor to bring the columnists and the reporters and something on one paper.
Right.
And if I want to set up a website and I don't want to do all the things by myself, because I know a lot of like a very good photographer and a very good writer, I want them to do these kind of things by themselves, but on the same platform. So how can I make it run?
See this click called authors and users? Right? One of the things you can do is add a new user. Now the admin account is very powerful. You can add plugins, you can even delete the whole site, right? But what if you wanted somebody who was just a photographer, just a writer, right? You can make a new user account for them, and if you have their email, it will automatically be sent to them. And you have roles, okay? So that person might be an author or a contributor. They might be an editor, and that means that they can see everybody's posts when they log in. The admin can see everybody's posts, edit everybody's posts, delete or make visible or invisible other people's posts, right? Somebody who's an author or a contributor can only see their own posts and edit their own posts, right? But they can probably publish, right? So if you wanted to even deputize somebody else to help you edit, you would make another editor, right? And each of those people have different levels of what are called permissions on the site. They have different permissions to do things. So you could have lots of potential contributors to this.
Yeah, I think that's good.
So I don't know if this is naive at all, but are there, if you wanted to open up the blog or the site only to a certain group of people, is that possible? Or once it's out there, is it just out there for everyone?
No, you can see how it says up where does it say? Users can't register themselves, but you can manually create users, right? That means that anybody who wants to post a new blog entry on your site has to go through you.
Meaning in terms of readers?
In terms of readers.
So once it's out there, it's totally public?
The way it is now, yes. You can password protect individual posts, and I wouldn't be surprised to find out that there is a plugin that lets you make a private site so that what you see when you first come in there is a login screen. Right? So you can make a group blog just for the people in that group if you want to, and a lot of people do that. That's actually not naive at all. A lot of people actually use these as sort of like group organizers. Okay. I think we kind of ran through everything.
Just one request.
Yes, please.
From the beginning, when I was requesting if there is step by step, and if you can share that, through the email, that would be fantastic.
Let me ask you a question. Would you prefer text if written? Or one of the things that I do a lot is, this is really fun, I'll show this to you. Is a screencast. I can make video of what appears on my computer screen as I do it with a voiceover from me. Let me see, if I guess they don't really have an example here, but if you went to YouTube and search screencast, a lot of what you find is instructions for how to use a piece of software or how to use a website. But sometimes I actually prefer the written instructions because I want to go at my own pace, right? So on the other hand, sometimes the screencast is nice because instead of, it's sometimes difficult to translate the written instructions to what you're actually seeing on the screen. So I don't know which one would be superior in this particular way. What do you? Let's take a vote. Screencast?
Yep.
Text?
Both.
You are a tough master.
If it's a screencast, you can stop it.
Yeah.
You can pause
Yes, you
it.
can
So
pause.
you can rewind it. Yeah, it's not like
Right.
you missed the boat and.
Well,
you know,
first thing to say is that there's been a video taken of tonight. So you can go back, it's going to go onto the Shorenstein Centre web page. So you can actually go back after it's been uploaded and replay slowly the parts that we've been through tonight. So that takes some of the work out of it, and perhaps that means you don't need to do it.
Well, you know, we went through it piece by piece and stopped, right? And that's why it took so long.